November 24, 2014, Los Angeles. Sony Pictures Entertainment, a Monday morning that started like any other. Until it didn't, the screens didn't flicker slowly. They didn't warn, they just changed, a red skeleton on black. A message in white text below it, "We've already warned you and this is just the beginning. We've obtained all your internal data." Within seconds, the IT department became a war room. Within minutes, the entire network was gone, 3/4 of their servers dead. Email, payroll, financial records, encrypted, destroyed, inaccessible. This wasn't a movie plot, it was a siege. The attackers called themselves the Guardians of Peace, but they were lying about everything except one thing: they had what they said they had. Over the next 72 hours, the full scope emerged. Unreleased films, private emails between executives, personnel records, home addresses, salaries, all of it leaked, indexed, weaponized. Then came the threat: cancel your film or we release everything. Cancel the interview or we're coming for the theaters. For the first time in modern history, a cyberattack had executed a form of extortion that worked. Sony pulled the film, theaters stayed dark. A major studio capitulated to an invisible enemy. The incident rippled far beyond Hollywood. It signaled something critical: the rules had changed. And not everyone had gotten the memo. Within weeks, the FBI would trace the attack back to an unexpected source. Not hacktivists, not a criminal syndicate. A nation-state, North Korea, but to intelligence agencies watching Pyongyang, it wasn't a surprise. What was a surprise was that anyone was surprised at all. The Lazarus Group, also called APT-38, Bureau 121, or a dozen other names depending on which agency is tracking them, didn't emerge overnight. The roots go back decades. In the late 1990s, when North Korea could barely keep its power grid stable, Pyongyang's military intelligence arm, the Reconnaissance General Bureau, made a calculated decision. They would build a cyber army, not hacktivists sleeping in basements. Elite units, handpicked, trained, weaponized. By the early 2000s, North Korea's best young minds identified as children for their computational aptitude were being funneled into schools like the University of Automation in Pyongyang. 5-year programs, advanced cryptography, network infiltration, malware design, tradecraft. Those who excelled didn't need to worry about jobs. The regime absorbed them into Bureau 121, a shadow unit inside the military intelligence apparatus. In exchange, they received something rare in North Korea: luxury, apartments, cash bonuses, status, security. In a country where most citizens lived on ration rice, these hackers were untouchable. Because their regime understood something the West was still learning: cyber warfare doesn't require a massive military. It requires genius-level talent, patience, and a willingness to operate in the shadows. By the mid-2000s, these operatives began dispersing. Intelligence reports placed North Korean hacker teams in Shenyang, China. In other cities across Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, they weren't there as tourists. They were there to work. Operating from foreign soil meant better internet infrastructure, fewer restrictions, and critically deniability. An attack traced to Vietnam looks different than an attack traced to Pyongyang, unless you dig deep enough. The first public signals came in 2009. South Korean government networks started collapsing. Media outlets went dark. It looked coordinated. It felt targeted. Security researchers across the world started noticing patterns in the malware: the same tools, similar code structures, peculiar file naming conventions. Someone was responsible for all of it. Someone with resources, someone organized. They gave the actor a name, Lazarus Group, and then, in March 2013, Lazarus Group announced itself to the world. Operation Dark Soul. South Korean banks and broadcasters went down simultaneously, not one at a time. All at once, tens of thousands of machines across the country suddenly froze. A team has stopped dispensing cash. News broadcasts went silent. The entire financial infrastructure of a modern economy locked up for hours. When South Korean investigators picked through the debris, they found fingerprints, malware signatures, code patterns, every thread led back to Pyongyang. This was the message. We can hurt you whenever we want. Not tomorrow, today. For the first time, a nation-state had demonstrated it could disrupt a modern economy at will with no warning and no ability to stop it once it started. The ramifications sank in slowly among security experts. But the implications were stark. If North Korea could do this to South Korea, what could they do to anyone else? Then came Sony, and the world stopped ignoring the threat. The Sony hack was different from Dark Soul. It wasn't just destruction, it was intimidation, extortion, political coercion. It proved that Lazarus Group wasn't just interested in espionage or chaos. They were interested in power, in bending the will of major institutions through digital leverage. The FBI's response was swift and public. They named Pyongyang, they released technical details. They tried to establish a narrative. This is North Korea. These are their tools. We know. We will respond. And they did. Sanctions, diplomatic fallout, rhetoric, everything short of military action. But behind the scenes, while the world was still reacting to Sony, Lazarus Group was already moving on to their next operation. And this one wasn't about politics, it was about money. The Bangladesh Bank heist, February 2014, Dhaka, Bangladesh, the central bank. For weeks, maybe months, hackers had been living inside the bank's network, invisible, patient, mapping the infrastructure, identifying the keys, learning the rhythm. Late one Friday night, when most staff had gone home for the weekend, they made their move. They knew how the bank worked, they knew where the money moved. They knew about SWIFT, the secure financial telecommunications network that connects every major bank on Earth. And they knew how to impersonate the Bangladesh Bank. A series of messages appeared on the New York Federal Reserve secure network. They looked legitimate, they had valid codes. They instructed the Fed to transfer nearly $1 billion from Bangladesh's reserves to accounts in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Cambodia. If it had worked, if no one had noticed, it would have been the largest bank heist in history. The theft would have happened in microseconds. The money would have vanished into accounts they controlled, but one thing went wrong. A single printer in Dhaka that automatically records SWIFT transactions suddenly stopped working. The hackers disabled it on purpose, hoping to delay discovery until the weekend was over and the money was gone. What they didn't account for: a routine audit. When bank officials reviewed transactions on Monday, something didn't add up. One transfer request had a typo. A small error, enough to trigger suspicion. That single typo stopped a $20 million transfer from going through. Other transactions were flagged, scrutinized, blocked, but not all of them. By the time the alarm was raised, $81 million had already left the bank. The money moved into casinos in the Philippines, into accounts in Sri Lanka. Then it dispersed, fragmented, laundered through cryptocurrency exchanges and shadow banking networks. When investigators finally traced the attack back to its source, they found the same signatures, the same code patterns, the same tradecraft. Lazarus Group, North Korea, a nation-state, had just robbed a central bank. How do you pull this off? How does a hacker on the other side of the world infiltrate a secure financial institution and walk away with millions? It starts with a single email. A banker receives what looks like a job application, an invoice, a software update, something routine, something that doesn't trigger alarm bells. Hidden inside a link, an attachment, a tiny piece of malicious code. One click, that's all it takes. The malware installs silently. The hacker now has a foothold inside the network. From there, they move like ghosts. They don't announce themselves. They don't grab files immediately. They spend weeks, sometimes months, mapping the infrastructure, understanding which servers matter, where the sensitive data lives, how permissions work, how to escalate privileges without being noticed. In a bank, they're looking for the money transfer systems. In a studio, they're looking for the film archives and executive communications. They install custom malware spy programs that communicate back to them, that monitor traffic, that can destroy data if needed. They plant backdoors, hidden entry points. If one piece of malware is discovered and removed, they can slip back in through another route. When it's time to steal, they cover their tracks obsessively. Data is encrypted, moved in small chunks so it doesn't trigger bandwidth alerts. Money, especially cryptocurrency, is laundered through a maze of accounts. Split into thousands of microtransactions, bounced through digital wallets. Run through mixers out services specifically designed to obscure the origin of funds. By the end, the trail is nearly impossible to follow. The money has been washed through cyberspace and their communications encrypted, routed through compromised servers in other countries. A bank in Bangladesh thinks the attacker is in Vietnam or Germany or Singapore, until forensic analysts spend months, years tracking the signal back to its true source. Pyongyang, the Sony hack cost the studio tens of millions in losses. More importantly, it created a precedent. If you anger the regime, they can weaponize your private communications. They can threaten your employees. They can make it impossible for you to function. Free expression became conditional on the goodwill of a dictator 5,000 miles away. The Bangladesh heist triggered something different: panic. Every bank in the world suddenly realized, if the central bank of Bangladesh could be robbed like this, so can we. Banking infrastructure was built on the assumption of air-gapped security and institutional controls. Lazarus Group proved those assumptions were obsolete. Banks scrambled to upgrade. SWIFT protocols were re-examined. International cooperation accelerated. Bangladesh's central bank governor resigned. Investigations launched across 4 continents, but there were worse attacks coming. In May 2017, something called WannaCry spread across 150 countries in a single day. Hospitals in the UK, shipping companies, railway systems, universities, governments. Over 300,000 machines locked by malware that displayed a single message: "Oops, your files have been encrypted." Surgeries were cancelled. Patient records became inaccessible. Supply chains broke. The initial spread was so fast, so indiscriminate, that experts initially thought it was a weapon deployed by a superpower. It wasn't. It was Lazarus Group, North Korea. A cyber weapon so reckless, so willing to cause collateral damage that it exposed the fragility of the entire connected world. And then there were the cryptocurrency thefts, quieter, less visible, but staggering in scale. A Japanese exchange called CoinCheck lost $600 million to a single Lazarus Group operation. An online gaming network lost $500 million. These numbers, almost incomprehensible, flow out of the digital world and into physical reality: missiles, nuclear programs, military infrastructure. Experts estimate that a significant portion of North Korea's weapons development budget now comes from stolen cryptocurrency. When North Korean hackers steal digital coins, they're paying for ballistic missiles. The world didn't sit passively. The FBI indicted North Korean hackers by name. The Treasury Department issued sanctions. Cryptocurrency exchanges were pressured to monitor transactions and flag suspicious activity. The message was clear: we know who you are. We're coming after you. But there is a problem with indicting someone who lives behind one of the most isolated borders on Earth. You can't arrest them, you can't freeze their assets if they don't have assets in your country. Sanctions mean nothing to a regime already under maximum sanctions. The only real leverage is deterrence. And the threat level required to deter a nation-state from a revenue source that keeps its government solvent is extraordinarily high, higher than most nations are willing to go. So the attacks continued, they evolved, they adapted to new security measures. If one bank tightened protocols, Lazarus Group hit a different bank with a different approach. If one cryptocurrency exchange added monitoring, they targeted decentralized exchanges. If one malware strain was patched, they released a new one. The cat-and-mouse game wasn't really a game. It was a slow-motion arms race. Here's what keeps security experts awake at night. North Korea's cyber units are now battle-tested. They've proven they can infiltrate the most secure institutions on Earth. They've stolen hundreds of millions of dollars. They've shut down critical infrastructure. They've intimidated entire industries. And they've done it all while the regime's borders remain sealed. The core members of Lazarus Group are unreachable. Indictments are meaningless to someone inside Pyongyang. Sanctions are leverage against a country with nothing to lose. Every day, they're getting better. Other nations have noticed: Russia, China, Iran, a dozen others. What North Korea proved is that you don't need a massive military-industrial complex to wage war in cyberspace. You just need brilliant people, patience, and a willingness to operate in the shadows. The question isn't whether other nations will follow North Korea's playbook; they already have. The real question is, how do you defend against an attack that travels at the speed of light, leaves no physical evidence, and originates from a source you can't retaliate against? And what happens when cyber warfare becomes so routine, so normalized, that the world stops reacting to it? When the intrusions become invisible because there are simply too many to notice. In Pyongyang, in windowless rooms, programmers work on code that will disrupt power grids thousands of miles away. They'll never see the impact. They'll never know the hospital that couldn't perform surgery because of their work. They'll never hear the alarms, but their government will reward them, celebrate them, call them heroes. They are, perhaps, the most dangerous soldiers on Earth. Not because of their physical strength, but because of the asymmetry they've created. A nation that can barely feed its people can collapse the infrastructure of the richest countries on Earth. The question that remains isn't, can they do this? They've proven they can. The question is, what do we do about it? And more importantly, who else is building what North Korea has already built?